We're doing very well on the war front.
We set the terms of this war from start to finish.
9,000 Americans have been able to leave the region since the start of this war.
Nobody should classify this as war. It is combat operations.
I wouldn't call this a war as much as I'd call it a conflict that should be very short and sweet.
I don't know if this is technically a war.
We have declared war. So if we haven't declared war, then I don't see that. The president hasn't asked us to declare war yet, but they have declared war on us.
Do you consider it a war?
It's a significant military operation.
Strategic strikes are not war.
They have declared war on us. I don't believe in the semantics. We've talked about the language this morning. We're not at war right now. We're 4 days in to a very specific, clear mission, an operation.
So to your point, Congressman, you have the administration, including the president, calling this war, and then you have Republicans in Congress not calling it that. Is the United States, in fact, at war with Iran? And if so, do you think politicians should be more explicit with their constituents, the American public, about that?
Well, that's precisely why Congress is supposed to vote, right? Congress is supposed to have this debate so that when the country goes to war, you don't just find the military at war, the country's in it together. We responded in 3 days after 9/11 and gave a clear authorization for use of military force. It didn't say the words declare war, and part of the reason it was more open-ended and ambiguous there is you were going after transnational criminal organizations, terrorist groups, Al-Qaeda and their affiliates. And so here you're really truly focused on a nation state. I think it would be clean to have a declaration of war if the president felt that was the thing. We're not voting on that today. And I think it's right for the public to be, cautious about committing to another war. And they've put pressure on their representatives to give a vote. And I think whether you're for it or against it, Congress should vote. The War Powers Resolution that we're voting on today isn't even that.
Just to follow up with you, do you see this as a war?
Yeah, it's clearly a war. I think everyone thinks it's laughable, and it's the same. Like it's most people. Apparently only if you lean to the right, you can differentiate between men and women. But most people know that this is a war. It's an act of war. And if it's an act of war for Iran to attack us and now they're at war with us, I think it's pretty clear when you take out the leader of their country and the top 40 or so other leaders in his team, it was an act of war. It was meant to be an act of war, and we shouldn't shirk from calling it what it is.
So, Congressman, is this a war?
Well, come on. It's a laughable question, right? And in your montage there, of course, you've got the executive branch, the Secretary of State, the president, and others saying it's a war, and members of Congress saying it's not a war. Why are they saying that? They're saying that because they took a passing glance at the United States Constitution before they promised to uphold and support it, that the Constitution is very clear that the Congress gets to declare war. That's why you have Republicans saying like, oh, it's not a war. And look, anybody who's studied any history knows the experience of Vietnam. There was no declaration of war in Vietnam either. It was called a police action. Vladimir Putin right now says that he's running a special military operation. The fact that you don't call it a war does not do away with the fact that you are brutally abnegating on your constitutional responsibility in the context of 6 Americans dead, in the context of billions of dollars of taxpayer money being spent, in the context of gasoline prices already up almost $0.25 a gallon. It is the responsibility of the Congress to at least consider whether this is wise or not. And it is shocking to me to see more than half of Congress, the Republicans, say that we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. This is not the Congress of the United States anymore, Wolf. It is the Duma, because whatever it is that the dear leader, Donald Trump, wants is what the Republicans here in the Congress are going to deliver.
Do you think the Congress would need to authorize any military action against Iran beyond the 60-day or 90-day window?
No.
Senate Republicans showing no appetite for checking President Trump's war powers. On Wednesday, they went on the record in support of the war in Iran by rejecting a bipartisan war powers resolution. The vote was 53-47. Kentucky's Rand Paul is the only Republican who voted with Democrats to rein in the president. Now, one Democrat, John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, voted with Republicans.
I'm open to a better opportunity for more peace and prosperity for the Iranian people, for more security that Israel deserves.
So that's the point. And this was not an illegal war based on terms of what the War Powers Act is.
Today, representatives in the House get to go on the record when they vote on the War Powers measure. Joining me now in the group chat, Aaron Blake, CNN senior political reporter, Mike Dubke, former Trump White House communications director, and David Sanger, CNN political and national security analyst. Gentlemen, I wanted to talk about this because we don't necessarily think these votes were going to pass. That suddenly in the middle of strikes, lawmakers would say, actually, you went too far. However, when I look back at the vote 2001 for Afghanistan, 1 no vote. 2002, 23 no votes in the Senate. These records get remembered of where you were in a moment. That is a big decision for the country. So what's at stake for lawmakers?
Well, and I'd also point out that we had similar votes on the military action in Venezuela, and we actually saw more crossover where Republicans were more willing to check the president's war powers in that case. I think when you're talking about Iran, this is an issue where the party is much more hawkish. They're much more on the president's side. But I don't necessarily think that that means the party is sanguine about where this is headed right now. And you saw that in some of the comments from members who wound up voting against this measure. The moderates like Susan Collins, Todd Young from Indiana, they basically said, I don't want to check the president on this right now, but that doesn't mean they don't have concerns about where this could be headed.
And it's probably because some of the polling. When I look at the poll that we did earlier this week, the opinion of the U.S. airstrikes against Iran among U.S. adults, right now it's 59% disapprove. Also, when we break that down by sort of Republicans, independents, Democrats, as always, I tend to look at the independence number, and I see that disapproval number at 68%. So they do have to answer to constituents soon.
They do. And this vote was really more about November of 2026, I think, than it was about what has been happening over the last week. So this was a messaging vote. I think the Democrats really were desperate to get Republicans and others on the record so that they can use this in the next midterm elections.
Yeah.
But
I think I have an example of that, actually. Let me just play one. It'll help your point. Democratic Senator John Hickenlooper of Colorado, him talking about Trump's motivations.
Every strike, every military escalation, every headline is a distraction. It pulls our attention overseas from the urgent economic struggles that Americans face at home. It distracts from the hard, less glamorous work it takes to make life more affordable for the American people. Iran is only the latest in a long line of distractions.
Following up on this, because I heard a similar argument from Andrew Schultz on his podcast.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of like a range of people who look at this and say, what is the U.S. voter getting out of this?
In terms of message discipline, I will give this to Democrats right now. They keep coming back to affordability. Whatever the president does, they keep coming back to affordability. So somebody must have gotten the memo from the DNC that that's our pathway forward. But specifically on this War Powers Act and this vote, this is being set up. If this action in Iran goes terribly wrong for the president, they're going to get off affordability and they're going to talk about the unchecked powers of the White House. So that's where we're headed with this one.
I want to play for you, David, the Israeli President Herzog, who was on CBS, and he was asked about making the case, and I believe the anchor said, because this is not a popular war, and let's see if we have that.
I understand it's not a popular war in America, because, usually people do not know the intricacies of the war, and they also compare it to previous and other wars. This is a unique war.
Well, all wars are unique wars. But if we just pull the politics out of this for a moment, which I realize is virtually impossible in Washington or any place else, what was the War Powers Act enacted to do? It came out in 1973. And the concern was that we had gotten into a whole series of wars after World War II, including Korea and Vietnam, without Congress exercising the constitutional duty of a declaration of war or not. It set a category of moments where the president could act by himself or herself if the U.S. was attacked. No answer there, and that no problem there, and that explains, for example, why presidents have unilateral capacity to deal with nuclear weapons, right? If we're under attack. But in a case like this, essentially a war of choice, the president didn't need to go at this particular moment. The War Powers Act is pretty clear that Congress has got to act, and it has in the past. It acted in the Persian Gulf War. Iraq and Afghanistan wasn't a formal declaration of war, but it was an authorization to use military force. With this vote, everybody who votes no on this, separate from the politics, is basically saying we are willing to go cede that congressional power. And that strikes me as a little bit strange because it's not something in the Senate they usually want to do, which is give up their own capacity and power. That is their one lever here.
Although if people look at the last couple of months, whether it's tariffs, whether it's a variety of things, it does not seem this is a Congress that is interested in taking back its power.